Welcome back to TK Tennis. So it's no secret that Coco Gauff's forehand can be a liability for her, and that her forehand and her swing path in specific is flawed, and because of that, her technique breaks down. And without changes to her forehand, she's going to be challenged to win Grand Slams against her biggest rivals. Now, this video is not meant to be criticism, it's meant to be critique. There is a difference. Criticism is to express disapproval, whereas critique is to evaluate or analyze something constructively. So let's jump into it. Let's first define what the problem is. And the two problems are an exceptionally long take back, which she's not alone in that, but we're going to break down this video from Coco's most inefficient swing path to the most efficient swing path with some of her rivals. Now let's first define what a more efficient swing might look like. Typically on tour, men and women are like, a more efficient swing path will end up staying within this red box right here. Less efficient swing paths will end up being in this box over here. And what do I mean by that? I mean the hands and the racket. The more the hands and racket can stay in this box and not over here in this box, the better and more efficient the swing path is. Now let's move over to Coco and draw these same three boxes right down the middle of her body. Box 1 on the right, box 2 on the left, and then also this overhead box. Now let's see how much of her hand and her racket goes into this box that's behind her. She takes the racket back. Notice the first part, how high her racket is above her head. Then I'm going to redraw these three boxes since she's moved a bit. Now notice how much her racket head has now gone into the left box, and her hand is also well on the opposite side of her body behind her. Then it will cross back into the right box. So again, look how high it is. Look how far her racket is behind her back now. 4 transfers into the right box. And some of you might think, what's the big deal? She has a very long swing path. Well, that is a very big deal, because the longer the swing path is, the more challenged or vulnerable you are to fast balls. And also, a longer swing path makes it harder to adapt and be able to hit the ball out in front. So she's more likely to miss time or not be able to hit the ball out in front of her like she'd like to, especially if she's being pushed around a little bit. These longer swing paths require even better timing, and they require more time. So in summary, it's less compact and it has a higher risk of breaking down. Now, some of you might think, well, there are a lot of other players with such long swing paths, and there are, and they experience the similar problems. So going from the least efficient to more efficient, we're going to take Aryna Sabalenka right here and draw these same 3 boxes. Now she's going to move a little bit, and the boxes should move as well, but they won't in this example. Now, like Coco, her racket is high, but notice the difference with her hand and her racket. So again, she starts at high, she's moving backwards, so I move the boxes back. But notice how her racket comes downwards more versus Coco's, who is behind her more. You can see the difference where Coco's racket is much farther behind her back, where Aryna has her racket coming down more into a pat the dog position. So while they both start out with very long swings, Aryna is a little bit more compact, comes down, and her hand is only outside of that right box momentarily, where Coco's was outside of that right box for a significant amount of time. And while Sabalenka doesn't have quite the issue with timing as Coco may have, especially in stressful situations, she also can get pushed around. If someone's hitting very aggressively to Aryna, she will have trouble timing the ball and will often make mistakes as well, but it's not as dramatic as what you see with Coco. Now let's take a look at Elena Rybakina, the next most efficient out of the top players in the WTA Tour. Now we're not going to draw the boxes because the angle's not quite as good, but you'll be able to see this. Pay close attention to her right hand to see if it ends up drifting behind her or just towards the back of the court. So let's move it forward, and let's stop at the most extreme point, and notice that her hand is still facing to the right side of her body, and it is not facing behind her whatsoever. And then you move it forward, you see a dramatic improvement in efficiency where her right hand and compactness stays out to the right side of her body, and the racket head never goes behind her body. Now let's take a look at the most efficient by far. Again, if we draw these 3 boxes, we're pretty much at the same angle. The right side of her body, she's going to move back into that a little bit, and above. Notice that her racket is not inside the top box, so it already stays lower, meaning her hands are lower and more compact. And as we move forward, watch how her racket drops down and immediately transfers to going forward. This happens on every one of her shots. Her hands and her racket head, they never get close going behind her back. Her hands are essentially always staying on this side of her body. The difference between these 4 strokes is pretty dramatic. Iga has by far the most efficient and compact swing path where her hands and her racket never end up going behind her. And what's more is you'll notice how compact and how efficient the inside to outside swing is, where she has her hands very close to the body. So this is a classic and the most efficient inside out swing. Your hands stay close, your racket stays close, which allows you to move freely, and then it transitions. But notice how then she'll now swing out to the ball in this motion. So it starts off in, and the swing is out. That is textbook efficient forehand that ends up being compact and extremely efficient and allows her to master her technique and hit late less often than the 3 peers that we showed before, along with Elena Rybakina also having very efficient forehand stroke mechanics compared to Sabalenka and Coco. So the question becomes, can a professional player like Coco Gauff make such dramatic changes to her forehand that are probably needed in order to be able to compete at the highest level against her peers, versus making more incremental adjustments? And that depends. That depends on the player and several other factors. First, they have to be able to accept and recognize that they have flaws. Number 2, they have to have a willingness to actually make such a dramatic change, because they have to overcome potential stubbornness, because Coco's been swinging this forehand for years and she's going to need to break habits, which is difficult to do. And you have to have the commitment to break those old habits and form new habits. Some people might say players at this caliber can no longer do that. Well, I don't believe that to be true, especially at such a young age. You can make adjustments, but it's still not easy. It will take a lot of commitment from Coco to recognize these flaws and to work on new habits and adjustments to her stroke to make it more compact so that her technique doesn't break down in the most stressful circumstances, which are big time matches in Grand Slam semifinals and finals. So these are her strokes from 2024. I'm looking forward to as she comes out of the offseason. She ended up parting ways with Brad Gilbert this past year. In the offseason, I would suspect that Coco's been working on the forehand and her forehand mechanics to make the adjustments. Hopefully they're just not small incremental changes, because she has large enough flaws in her forehand. I think she should consider major changes to her forehand. This has been done by many players in the past. So as a recreational player, this is something that you can take note of. We all have cameras, and if you set the camera up on the court and take a look at your stroke, you want to also, even though you don't have the skills and athleticism of someone like Coco, what you want to try and avoid is having these swing paths that end up going behind your body. It's better to try and keep your back swings a little bit more compact, and then at the same time work on your in to out swings. If you are striking the ball with some semblance of acceleration and a full swing, even at the recreational level, you can implement some of these techniques where having your swing path like Iga has here and moving it from in without dropping the racket too far behind the back and then swinging out. That's it for today's video. Remember to like and subscribe, and if you have any questions, ask them in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next ace.